Bill Nova on YouTube. So I brewed a few lagers that were just okay. My question is, how do you get the crispness into a lager? Thanks. I'm gonna check out. We're gonna dig into an article that I found from the Escarpment Labs website, and I remember reading this, and I thought it was an interesting thing, and it centers a little bit upon the this does talk about Kvike yeast. All right, it does talk about Kvike yeast, but I think some of the things play. One of the issues that they were talking about crispy boys, or these crispy light beers that people are brewing now. That pH plays a role in that, and Kvike tends to drop pH a little bit more than standard ale yeast. So that was kind of how this came out of this. But let's dig into this great blog post that they had on the Escarpment Labs website. They're a yeast lab out of Canada, I believe. So if you're Canadian folks, look for their stuff. pH is critical throughout the brewing process. From the water that is used to hydrate the mash through to the finished beer, nearly every ingredient plays a role in modulating beer pH. The water contains minerals that determine the degree of pH buffering. The color and amount of grain influences the pH during the mash. Hops too can influence pH, especially during dry hopping, where the pH may rise by up to 0.3 units. 0.3 tenths. That's interesting. That's generally a tenth per pound per barrel. So just so you know. The same is true of yeast. Some yeast drop pH more than others. Following reports of low final beer pH from brewers including Long Beach Beer Lab, Levi Fried, and others on the Milk the Funk group, we made sure to include testing beer pH on a massive screen where we are running to compare all of our yeast strains. What we see here is that Kvike does indeed drop pH more than average yeast, and certainly more than English ale yeast and lager yeast, categories which tend to produce the least acidic final beer pH. This has implications for flavor, as low beer pH is sometimes associated with perception of a thinner body, as well as harsher and more astringent hop character. It is quite fascinating that despite Kvike being used in many of the same styles as the lager and English strains, lagers, air quotes, and NEIPAs, respectively, they do produce beer with noticeably different terminal pH. These data present a possible solution. When brewing with Kvike, especially when targeting a crisp and clean beer, it can be helpful to use water with higher buffering capacity, mineral additions. It can also be helpful to avoid wort pH that is too low. While targeting 5.1 to 5.2 pH may be perfect for a Helles fermented with lager yeast, the same wort may end up producing a slightly too acidic and thin beer in the hands of a Kvike yeast. Pushing that wort pH to 5.4 or 5.5 may help improve the final sensory characteristics of the beer. All right, so we end up talking about Kvike yeast a little bit with this. And the original question was talking about like the crispiness of a lager. Now, with Kvike yeast, you can make some lager-like beers, apparently, like with their Lutra. So this would play in perfectly with that. If you are using lager yeast, though, the reason I mention this is pH is such a big important part of this. So when you are fermenting your pale lagers, your crispy boys, with lager yeast, I don't think you want to be driving that pH too low, as the article says. I think ultimately you want to be seeing that in the 5.4 range, which is kind of, I think, a sweet spot. You can prevent some thinness in those beers. But the flip side is the other things for keeping those lagers crisp are taking the residual sweetness kind of as low on the lower end of the style as you can, and also maybe dropping that bitterness a little bit too. They're typically correlated in a ratio, right? And you can kind of see that. I would shoot for the lower end of both of those things, and I think that can help keeping that residual sweetness down Doesn't mean you have to throw a bunch of bitterness in to compete with it, and the whole thing just becomes more approachable and more palatable, right? You have your pH in the appropriate range, and those things just really pop off. So anyways, that's kind of my advice when it comes to dropping those crispy boys. All right. You can also run some adjunct at it. I think that can help, depending on how light you want to be going with that. So yeah. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you feel as if you got any value out of the video, please like and subscribe. There are also other videos that you can watch. They're gonna maybe be over here or over here. Appreciate you watching.